give me an answer.
How is it possible to be alienated from him if you never actually get to know him in the first place?
Great question. This woman asks, how is it possible to be alienated from God if I've never known God? Sounds like a paradox, an oxymoron to me. Jesus and the Bible insist that no atheist has a legitimate excuse. The only reason an atheist does not find God is for the same reason that a criminal does not find the police. He's running away. Why? The order and design of nature, the order and design of the human body demands an intelligent mind, demands a creator. Secondly, the inner moral law that all of us human beings have demands a moral lawgiver. And that's why Paul writes in Romans chapter 1, although they knew God, they neither glorified God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Nobody has a legitimate reason to say, I'm sorry, I can't believe God exists. Because God has left so much evidence of his existence, you have to intentionally run away from him. All of us have violated our consciences. We all experience guilt. Well, what is guilt? Guilt is God's alarm system. Wake up, smell the coffee you've done wrong, come back. And Christ bled and died on a cross to forgive us, to wipe away our guilt, and to give us freedom in life. Have I answered your question?
I think so. At the same time, you have to address the question of how, if we're inbuilt with logic, human logic, for example, to always go back to the Creator, and yet a lot of logic actually ends up pointing us away from it, points us towards, validifying things of this world. Well, how is that possible that God would have put that kind of logic in us to be kind of changed for that kind of purpose?
Fascinating question. There are some people who view God as an all-powerful being who guarantees that his will is done 100% of the time. I am not one of those people. I am convinced that Jesus Christ and the Bible reveal that God does not want to dominate you. He wants to share with you. God does not want to overrule you. He wants to interact with you. Obviously, what I'm getting at is free will. Because God is love, a loving being, God created you and me to interact in love with him. And that demands free will. So, logically, I have no right to be atheist or agnostic. Logically, the evidence is God exists. Now, I can take logic and twist it to the point where I think I'm rationalizing running away from God, but that doesn't really work. A classic example of this is Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell was a brilliant atheist philosopher who wrote a book called Why I Am Not a Christian. And his problem with Jesus Christ is Jesus cursing the fig tree. And he says Christ lost his temper. That's a sin. Give me a break. Bertrand Russell wrote an awful lot of philosophy on paper that he got from trees. And there's nothing wrong with that. And Christ obviously used a fig tree as an object lesson to teach his disciples a lesson. And yet the brilliant philosopher, Bertrand Russell, in his book, Why I'm Not a Christian, can use that kind of logic to justify rejecting Christ. That's twisted logic. That's very sad. Now, obviously logic has its limits. Logic is important, and obviously I use logic in the way I dialogue with you. So logic is very important, but we better acknowledge that there are limits to logic. Logically, I can't walk through that door because I always go half the distance between where I am now and the door, and then half the distance, and then half the distance, and then half the distance. So logic has its limits. But obviously, logic is very important. Reason is very important.
You said that when God created us, he limited his power by giving us what you call free will.
Correct.
But it doesn't, in the mind doesn't accept for a creator to have limited power. Can you agree with that?
No.
No. Completely disregarding what Jesus said.
No.
You honestly believe that the human, the innate thoughts, when it comes to what is a creator, they will come up in their head and say the creator has limited power, the creator has limited knowledge?
That's not what I said. It is possible for an all-powerful God to partially limit his power by creating us free.
But that doesn't mean all-powerful.
If you disagree with the definition, fine. I respect your right to disagree with the definition.
Okay, so then we'll take
but what
it
I'm
somewhere
saying
else.
is,
We'll take it somewhere
what
else.
Jesus insisted is, God is all-powerful, which means his will shall win in the end. But he's partially limited his power by giving us a free will. That's why if I go up to this gentleman, haul back, and send my fist towards his handsome face, God is not going to automatically put plexiglass in between and I bounce off the plexiglass. He's given me a free will, he's given me a hand, I can give the man money to feed him lunch, or I can roll it into a fist and send it crashing into his handsome face.
Okay.
I can do either, can't you?
Yeah, I can hit him if I choose.
But do you honestly think it's God's will for you to hit him?
Absolutely. When we had this discussion before, you said you have free will and you can make the choice to hit him or not hit him, but by free will, you're completely disregarding the option of a limited will. And I asked you before, if you have this free will, you can fly like a bird, you can make the sun come from the west, but you don't have this ability.
No,
God
ma'am.
did not will for you
Those are
to have
physical
this ability.
limitations you're talking about. You have switched from free will to the limits of gravity.
Not
You're right,
gravity.
I cannot fly through the air because gravity holds me to the ground and I don't have wings like a bird. And I'm not an airplane or a jet. I'm a human being, I don't have the ability to fly. That says nothing about free will. It says a lot about physical limitations.
Which you don't consider to be created by God? So now you're completely...
Of course I believe that's created by God. Gravity's created by God. I am created by God without wings, therefore I cannot fly.
Okay, so when these physical limitations are created by God, isn't it God's will to not create you with wings and to create this thing you call gravity that keeps you on the ground? It's God's will. That's God willed to create these things.
That's correct.
So God also willed for you to not have the ability to do these things. Correct?
Correct.
Yes, correct. So you, with this free will, are now limited by God's will.
Obviously there are limits.
Obviously, your will is limited by the will of God. Completely disregarding, for you just agreed to that.
No.
You just said it.
No, we were talking about physical limits.
That are created
and then we talked
by
about
the will of
a
God.
will that all of us have that enables us to love or to hate, to do good
Still limited
or to do
by
evil.
the will of God. Subject to the will of God.
But God has chosen to give us a precious gift
So,
of a
okay.
rational mind and free will.
Okay,
Now
so
he holds
when
us responsible for how we use those gifts. If I abuse children, I will have to answer to God on a day of judgment.
Absolutely.
If I murder, I will have to answer to God on a day of judgment. But I am free to be a Mother Teresa II or to be an Adolf Hitler II. I have to choose. I have to make up my life. Guys,
So
you don't
when
have to
you
study
say-
for your next exam.
when you say
you can just
choose-
party, party, party. But then you'll flunk, flunk, flunk. And if you go to your professor and say, how could you flunk me? He's going to say, I'm sorry, you answered incorrectly, you flunked. Part of having a free will means you understand there are consequences to my decisions. And I have to learn to live with the consequences of my decision to party, 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 because then I'll flunk, flunk, flunk. That's part of growing up and being an adult.
So can we say that God willed for the existence of time?
God created time.
God created time, and he existed before the creation of time.
Correct.
Okay. He is not subject or bound to time.
Correct.
So when you say that God chose to give us free will, you're saying at some point he didn't give us free will, at another point he gave us free will, all occurrences in time that God is not subject to.
That would be just as illogical as if I were to say, because God is eternal, God never created human life initially.
No.
That is
No.
baloney. Just because God is eternal does not mean that we have always existed. Human beings are the creation of God at a point in human history. Scientific evidence is that thousands of years ago, human life began. About 5 billion years ago, the Earth began.